My husband told me not to embarrass him. He said I was too plain for his wealthy colleagues, that I should stay in my lane. I agreed quietly. I smiled and said sure. A week later, he nearly choked when I walked into his private club as the owner. His so-called friends bowed to the woman he once dismissed. "Don't embarrass me tonight. You're a bit simple for my wealthy partners. Just keep to yourself." Julian delivered these lines while meticulously adjusting his Brioni tie in our bedroom mirror, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the forecast. I stood a few feet behind him, clutching the cocktail dress I'd been planning to wear for the Pinnacle Club dinner. I watched his reflection, searching for any flicker of awareness, any hint that he understood the sheer cruelty of what he'd just uttered. There was nothing. He simply perfected the knot, completely oblivious that his simple wife had personally reviewed and approved every single one of his partner's membership applications to the very club where tonight's event was being held. He had no idea that the towering building they revered as a monument to success had my name, Alara Vance, printed on the deed. "I spent 2 hours at the salon today just for this dinner," I murmured. "Davenport's wife flew to Milan last week just to find a new gown." He finally turned from the mirror, his expression one of strained patience. "You need to grasp this, Alara. At this level, appearances are everything. The first impression is the only one that counts." After 4 years of marriage, he was still convinced I lacked a basic understanding of social dynamics. I felt a powerful urge to remind him that I had witnessed those same immaculately dressed wives fumbling through superficial conversations at countless events, their designer labels and salon-perfect hair failing to conceal their ravenous hunger for validation. But instead, I just smoothed his already flawless tie, falling back into the role he'd assigned me on our wedding day. "What time do you think you'll be home?" I asked. "Late. These dinners always run long, especially when we're on the verge of closing a major deal." He glanced at the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the one he'd purchased to impress Mr. Davenport, completely unaware that Davenport's own timepiece was a high-end replica, a detail I'd noted but chose to overlook when I reviewed his membership file. "There's some leftover risotto in the fridge if you feel hungry." The leftover risotto from 3 nights ago, when he'd insisted on ordering from that Italian place that charged $50 for a basic mushroom risotto simply because they delivered to Pinnacle Club members. He'd barely touched his portion, complaining the truffle oil was overpowering, while I quietly ate a tuna sandwich I'd bought from the deli on our corner. After he departed, leaving behind a cloud of cologne that cost more than our monthly grocery bill, I sat at our small, unassuming dining table and opened my laptop. I wasn't checking our joint bank account or scrolling through social media feeds. I was reviewing the quarterly performance reports for E. Sterling Enterprises, the vast portfolio my grandmother, Evelyn Sterling, had painstakingly built from the ground up, the empire she had constructed while men just like Julian dismissed her as part of the furniture in their boardrooms. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Alistair Finch, the general manager of the Pinnacle Club. "Ms. Vance, tonight's dinner is proceeding as scheduled. Your husband's table is set for 12. Shall I proceed with standard protocol?" Standard protocol. It meant treating me like a phantom whenever Julian was on the premises, pretending the owner of the entire establishment was a complete non-entity. I had maintained this charade for 3 long years, watching Julian preen and posture in my building while telling anyone who asked that his wife, Alara, worked in office administration, always with a dismissive little hand wave that implied I spent my days filing paperwork and making coffee. "Yes," I typed back. "For now." The apartment always felt smaller when Julian was gone, or perhaps it was just more honest. Without his overbearing presence demanding attention, requiring constant reassurance that he was scaling the corporate ladder at the appropriate speed, I could finally breathe. I went to our bedroom closet and pushed past the neat row of Julian suits, Zegna, Tom Ford, Canali, to reach the far back wall. There, hidden from view, was a single garment bag he had never once noticed. Inside hung a vintage Dior gown my grandmother had purchased in 1983, the year she cleared her first 10 million. She wore it only once, to a tense shareholder meeting where she seized a controlling interest in her first major commercial real estate venture. "Save this," she had told me during her final weeks in the hospice. "Wear it on the day you decide you're done hiding." I ran my hand over the deep blue silk, still flawless after all these years. Julian would have called it plain. It had simple, clean lines, no sequins, no flashy embellishments. He wouldn't have understood that its real power was in its understatement, that the woman wearing it needed no external decoration to command a room. My phone rang. Chloe. My cousin's name flashed on the screen, displayed over a picture from happier times, before her husband had systematically turned their marriage into a cold transaction, and she had turned her anguish into a cocktail of Xanax and Chardonnay. "I have to see you," she said, her voice tight, skipping any preamble. "Daniel's at it again. I found the receipts." "Come over," I said immediately. "Julian's out for a dinner." "At the Pinnacle?" she asked. "Where else?" She let out a laugh, but it was brittle and sharp. Must be nice being married to someone important enough to get into the Pinnacle. The staggering irony of her words bit deep, but I swallowed it. Chloe arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a designer handbag that was worth more than a month of our rent, but her face was etched with a kind of exhaustion that no amount of money could ever fix. She collapsed onto our second-hand sofa, the one Julian always complained about when we had guests, and began to cry before she had even managed to take off her jacket. 24 years old, she sobbed into her hands. His new personal trainer. Can you even believe it? I'm 43, Alara. When did I become the disposable wife? I sat down next to her, offering a box of tissues and the comfort of silence. There were no words that could soothe this kind of pain, no platitude that wouldn't sound hollow and insincere. Chloe had married Daniel for love, or at least what she had believed was love, only to discover far too late that he had married her for her family's trust fund and social connections. Daniel doesn't even try to hide it anymore, Chloe continued, her voice ragged. He takes her to the Pinnacle for lunch. He books one of the private dining rooms. The staff, they all know. They give me these looks, these pitying stares whenever I'm there. The staff at my club witnessing the public demolition of my cousin's marriage in my private dining room. I made a silent mental note to review Daniel's membership status. There were certain standards that had to be upheld, even if Julian didn't think I was capable of understanding such concepts. "What are you going to do?" I asked her gently. "Leave him. Take whatever I can get in the settlement and just start over." Her eyes swept around our modest apartment, taking in the worn furniture, the cramped layout, the distinct lack of luxury. "You're so lucky, you know. Julian might not be wealthy, but at least he comes home to you." I almost laughed at the sheer absurdity of it all. Julian came home to the idea of me, to the convenient, low-maintenance wife who kept his life running smoothly while staying completely out of his real world. But Chloe didn't need to hear my problems tonight. She needed my sofa, my silence, and my unspoken promise that I wouldn't judge her for whatever she did next. After she left, I stood by our bedroom window watching the city lights glitter like scattered jewels below. Somewhere out there, Julian was sitting in my club, at my table, surrounded by men who owed their very presence there to my signature, telling them his wife was too simple for their company. The thought should have stung, but it didn't. Instead, it crystallized a feeling that had been forming in me ever since I'd first read my grandmother's will. Being underestimated was a weapon, but it was only effective if you knew exactly when to reveal your true power. Tonight wasn't the night, but soon, very soon, Julian was going to learn that the plain wife he'd so easily dismissed owned the very kingdom he was so desperate to conquer. Monday morning arrived and Julian was already gone, having left for the office before dawn. The only traces of his presence were the lingering scent of his cologne and a sticky note on the counter reminding me to pick up his suits from the dry cleaner. Mrs. Chen's shop was located 3 blocks from our apartment, a small business squeezed between a popular pedo restaurant and a struggling independent bookstore, the kind of neighborhood Julian condescendingly referred to as transitional whenever he had to explain our address. Mrs. Chen looked up from her large pressing machine as I walked in, her face breaking into the warm, genuine smile she saved for the regular customers who actually made conversation with her. "Mrs. Croft, I have Mr. Croft's suits all ready for you. Such beautiful material. He must be a very important man." "He likes to present himself professionally," I said, taking out my wallet. She shuffled into the back room, returning a moment later with 5 suits encased in protective plastic. As she began ringing them up, she tilted her head, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I saw him last Tuesday at that very fancy Pinnacle Club. My nephew is a valet there. Such an exclusive place. Tuesday." Julian had called me that morning, talking about a sudden client emergency, saying he'd be stuck in depositions all day. I kept my voice perfectly level. "Oh, he has a lot of meetings there." "Yes, with that very elegant blonde woman. She has such a lovely laugh. My nephew says you can hear it all the way across the dining room. Very charming. Is that his sister? They seem so very close." My fingers tightened around my credit card, but I forced a neutral expression onto my face. That must be someone from his firm. They often have team lunches together. Mrs. Chen nodded, but there was a flicker in her eyes that told me she wasn't entirely convinced. "Every Tuesday, my nephew says, the same table right by the window, the same woman. She must be a very important client." I signed the receipt, my signature just a little less steady than usual. Julian works with many important people. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, holding thousands of dollars worth of tailored suits, while the pieces of Mrs. Chen's accidental revelation clicked into place. Every Tuesday, the same woman, an elegant blonde with a memorable laugh. Julian had claimed to be working late every Tuesday for the last 2 months, always with a new excuse about a difficult client or an urgent brief that needed drafting. Back in the apartment, I hung his suits in the closet, each one in its designated spot, because Julian insisted that meticulous organization was paramount. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Can I stop by? Daniel's at another conference, and I can't stand being alone in that house." She showed up 30 minutes later with coffee and pastries from the expensive bakery Julian always claimed we couldn't afford. We sat at my small dining table, and I watched as she methodically picked apart a delicate almond croissant without taking a single bite. "I need to use your restroom," she said abruptly, standing up before I could even reply. But instead of walking toward the bathroom, I heard her footsteps pause in the hallway. "Ilara," she called out, her voice slightly muffled. "Where do you keep your extra blankets? I'm suddenly freezing." "Hall closet, top shelf," I called back, not giving it a second thought, completely forgetting what else was stored up there. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was a sharp, strangled gasp of air that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. I found Chloe sitting on the floor of the hallway, surrounded by a cascade of papers she'd accidentally knocked over while reaching for the blankets. Financial statements were scattered around her like fallen leaves, property deeds, investment portfolios. And there, lying directly in front of her, were the ownership documents for the Pinnacle Club, with my name, Ilara Sterling Vance, printed in bold, clear letters across the top. "Ilara." Her voice was a choked whisper. "What is all this?" I knelt beside her, my hands steady as I began to gather the papers. "It's something Julian doesn't know about." "Doesn't know about? You own the Pinnacle? The Pinnacle Club? Where Daniel and Julian practically live?" My grandmother left it to me, among other things. Chloe's eyes darted across the documents, her expression shifting from pure shock to something harder, more calculating. $95 million. You have $95 million, and Julian has no idea. "He never asked," I said simply. "He just assumed I was what I appeared to be." But why? Why would you hide all of this? I sat back on my heels, clutching the papers to my chest. Grandma Evelyn spent 40 years being invisible in boardrooms while men took credit for her ideas. She wanted me to find out if Julian loved me or if he loved the idea of what I could do for him. And he has lunch every Tuesday with an elegant blonde woman. Same time, same table, by the window. Chloe's face darkened with fury. That son of a... She cut herself off, then looked at me with a dawning new understanding. You're planning something. I'm waiting, I corrected her. There's a difference. She helped me put everything back into its hiding place, then returned to the dining table. Her entire demeanor changed. You know what? We're both fools, hiding who we are, just accepting whatever scraps they decide to throw us. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Julian's name lit up the screen. Fantastic news, he said, skipping any form of greeting. Davenport just called. I made senior partner, youngest in the firm's history. Congratulations, I started to say, but he was already talking over me. There's a celebration dinner tomorrow night at the Pinnacle. Black tie, very exclusive. Davenport says it's partners only, though. The wives will have their own event next month. Some kind of luncheon or something, more suited to your interests. More suited to my interests, as if he had the faintest clue what my interests actually were. I understand, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. You're not upset. I know you were looking forward to the partners' dinner. I had never once expressed even a flicker of interest in his firm's tedious dinners. He was projecting what he believed I should want, then dismissing it preemptively to make himself feel magnanimous. No, Julian, enjoy your celebration. You're the best, Alara. So understanding. Davenport's wife throws a fit about these things, but you just get it. You know your place. After he hung up, Chloe just stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. You know your place? Did he actually just say that to you? He says a lot of things, I replied. That night, Julian practiced his acceptance speech in the bathroom mirror while I lay in our bed, listening through the thin, cheap door. He thanked Davenport for his mentorship, Montgomery for the partnership, and a mysterious Isabel from consulting for her invaluable support. There was not a single mention of the wife who had worked 2 jobs to help put him through law school, who had typed up his legal briefs when he broke his wrist playing squash, who had dutifully attended every meaningless company picnic and pretended his colleagues' self-important stories were fascinating. So while he performed for his own reflection, I quietly retrieved my car keys and drove to the storage unit. Julian thought I couldn't afford a car. He had no idea about the sleek BMW registered to E. Sterling Enterprises that I kept garaged for moments just like this. For moments when I needed to be myself. The storage unit contained everything Julian had never cared enough to ask about. My grandmother's antique furniture, too valuable for our transitional apartment, but too full of memories to ever sell. Boxes filled with photographs from her decades of building an empire in absolute silence. And there, inside a leather-bound trunk that hadn't been opened since her funeral, was her personal journal. I sat on the cold concrete floor, reading by the harsh fluorescent light, her handwriting strong and decisive at first, then gradually weakening in the final pages, documented every single slight, every stolen idea, every moment when a man had taken credit for her brilliance. But alongside the litany of indignities were the triumphs, all carefully recorded in precise financial terms. The first profitable quarter, the first million, the first property acquisition, the purchase of the Pinnacle Club, bought out from under a man who had laughed at her investment proposals 20 years prior. The final entry, written just a week before she passed, made me close the journal and hold it tightly to my chest. Alara will understand the value of being underestimated. Let them think you're nobody until the moment you show them you're everything. I drove back from the storage unit with my grandmother's journal on the passenger seat, her words a powerful echo in my mind as I navigated the deserted city streets at midnight. Julian was fast asleep when I got back, sprawled across our bed in his old Harvard Law t-shirt, taking up 3/4 of the mattress as if, even in sleep, he needed to claim more than his share. The next morning unfolded like any other, except this time I knew it would be the last of its kind. I was in the kitchen organizing the pantry, arranging Julian's overpriced organic pasta into perfect, neat rows, because he insisted that visual organization promotes mental clarity. I heard him enter the kitchen behind me, his footsteps carrying the distinct weight of someone about to dispense what he considered to be profound wisdom. He paused at the microwave, using its dark, reflective surface as a makeshift mirror to adjust his Brioni tie. The silence stretched between us as I continued arranging his gluten-free crackers, waiting for whatever pronouncement or complaint he had prepared for the day. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he said suddenly, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "You're a bit simple for my wealthy partners. Just keep to yourself." The can of imported Italian tomatoes in my hand weighed exactly 14.5 ounces according to the label. I focused on that weight, on the cool feel of the metal against my palm, on anything other than the raw, visceral urge to turn and demonstrate just how much damage 14.5 ounces of canned produce could inflict upon a perfectly coiffed head of hair. From the living room, I heard Chloe's coffee cup connect with its saucer with a sharp, telling clink. She had heard every word through our paper-thin walls, the same walls Julian constantly complained about but refused to move from because the address was prestigious enough for his business cards. "Of course," I said, my voice perfectly steady as I placed the can on its designated shelf. "I understand completely." Julian made a small, satisfied sound, the kind he made when a negotiation tilted in his favor. He grabbed his travel mug of precisely heated coffee and headed for the door, not bothering with a goodbye kiss or even a glance in my direction. The apartment door clicked shut with its usual weary groan from the loose hinges he always promised to fix, but never did. Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway before Julian's footsteps had even faded from the hall. Her face was flushed with a type of rage that made her look years younger, more like the fiery cousin who used to defend me from schoolyard bullies than the weary woman whose husband was slowly destroying her with his infidelities. "I'm going after him," she announced, already moving toward the door. "That pathetic excuse for a man needs to hear exactly what—" I held up a hand and she stopped mid-stride. "No. No, Ilara. He just told you that you're too simple for his precious partners. I know exactly what he said." I turned from the pantry to face her, my expression calm and resolute. "This is my battle, Chloe, and it needs to be executed with precision, not with reactive anger." She stood there, practically vibrating with fury on my behalf, but something in my eyes must have communicated what I couldn't yet say out loud. She slowly walked back to our second-hand sofa, the one Julian deemed a social embarrassment, and sank into its worn cushions. "For years," she said, her voice quieter now but no less intense. "4 years of this, and you just take it?" I sat beside her, feeling the familiar dip of the cushions that had absorbed so many difficult conversations. "Tell me what you've seen, Chloe. Everything." She let out a humorless laugh. "Where do I even begin? The birthday he completely forgot because Davenport needed a fourth for a round of golf? The anniversary dinner he canceled 20 minutes before our reservation because Montgomery wanted to strategize over drinks?" Her hands moved animatedly as she spoke, painting a vivid picture of Julian's casual cruelties in the air between us. The way he introduces you at events, on the rare occasions he actually brings you along. "This is Ilara. She does administrative work," with that dismissive little wave, like he's shooing away an insect. Every word was a precise strike, a confirmation of the slights I had been meticulously recording in my mental ledger for years. "He doesn't even see you," Chloe continued, her voice dropping. "You're just functionality to him. You're the person who keeps his life organized so he can go out and pursue what he thinks really matters. And what do you think would hurt him the most? I asked, my voice low. Chloe's eyes narrowed, a sharp glint of understanding in them. Public humiliation, complete, undeniable, witnessed by everyone humiliation. Julian's entire sense of self is built on the perception of others. Take that away from him. She trailed off as the full scope of my plan began to dawn on her. You're going to destroy him at the pinnacle. I pulled out my phone and found the contact I had saved under AF Emergency, Alistair Finch's private number, given to me by my grandmother with explicit instructions to use it only when the time was right. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before pressing down firmly. The phone rang twice before a crisp, cultured British accent answered. Ms. Vance, I was wondering when you might call. Hello, Alistair. It's about time, if I may be so bold. I worked for your grandmother for 20 years, and for the last 3, I've had to watch you tolerate that insufferable man in your own establishment. You knew. My dear woman, I've known since the first day you visited with him. Your grandmother showed me your photograph every week during her final year. This is Alara, she would say. She'll understand when she's ready. My throat tightened at the image of my grandmother, dying but still meticulously planning my future. I'm ready now. Excellent. The partners' dinner is on Thursday, I believe. Your husband has requested the Churchill room. He has fine taste in rooms he can't afford. Alistair chuckled softly. Indeed. Shall we discuss the arrangements? I assume you'll want Philippe present. The photographer? The very same. He has discreetly captured every significant moment at the Pinnacle for the past decade. Very professional. But his images have a way of circulating among the membership. We spent the next 20 minutes crafting the intricate details, the seating arrangement that would place Julian at what he believed was the head of the table, but which would, in reality, become the stage for his public disgrace. The precise timing that would ensure maximum impact and visibility, the exact moment when Alistair would make his grand announcement after the appetizers had been served, but before the main course, a time when a few glasses of champagne had loosened inhibitions but had not yet clouded judgment. After ending the call, I looked at Chloe, who had been listening with an expression of undisguised glee. I need something to wear. You need armor, she corrected, already grabbing her car keys, and I know exactly where to get it. The drive to the high-end department store felt like crossing a threshold between 2 different worlds. Chloe pulled into the valet area, waving away my protests about the expense, and led me through glass doors I had only ever walked past. The private shopping suite was on the top floor, accessible only by a special elevator, a sanctum Julian didn't even know existed because he never thought to look beyond the men's department. I pulled out the Black Centurion card linked to E. Sterling Enterprises, the one Julian had never seen because he'd never bothered to look inside my wallet. The personal shopper's eyes widened almost imperceptibly at the card's weight and sleek design. Solid metal, not plastic, with no preset spending limit. "How may I assist you today?" she asked, her entire posture shifting to accommodate the presence of serious money. "She needs something that says power," Chloe announced before I could utter a word. "Something that makes every man in a room stand up when she enters." What followed was a complete transformation, one that cost more than Julian claimed we had in our entire life savings. A black, vintage Dior gown that appeared deceptively simple until you saw the masterful cut, the way it suggested form rather than revealing it. Louboutin heels that added 4 inches to my height and completely altered my posture, and the diamond earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, retrieved from the safety deposit box Julian didn't know existed. Standing before the 3-way mirror, I saw a stranger. This wasn't simple Alara. This wasn't the woman who organized pantries and quietly absorbed insults. This was someone who owned buildings, who controlled destinies, who could dismantle a man's entire world with a single, well-placed word. This was the woman my grandmother had always known I could become. Chloe dropped me off at our apartment building after our shopping spree, the designer bags hidden safely in her trunk until I could retrieve them later, away from Julian's oblivious eyes. The doorman, Mr. Henderson, gave me his usual polite nod, completely unaware that I had already drafted the paperwork to double his salary once I took official ownership of the building next month. Tuesday arrived and Julian left early for what he referred to as strategic planning sessions, but which I now knew were just extended breakfasts with Isabel Montgomery. I waited until his Uber had turned the corner before walking the 6 blocks to the nondescript office building Julian had never even glanced at, the one with E. Sterling Enterprises listed discreetly on the directory between a dental practice and a tax firm. My real office took up half of the 14th floor, a sprawling space my grandmother had designed herself, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city she had conquered in silence. Julian believed I spent my Tuesdays at the local community college, taking advanced spreadsheet courses, a fiction he had invented and I had never bothered to correct. The profound irony of him occasionally explaining basic Excel functions to me while I was managing multi-million-dollar international property portfolios never ceased to be darkly amusing. I settled at my desk and pulled up the Pinnacle Club's master membership database on my computer. These were the real files containing far more than just names and mailing addresses. Every single incident report, every member complaint, every whispered scandal that Alistair had diligently documented over the past 2 decades was contained within these digital records. My grandmother's unwavering insistence on thorough, meticulous record-keeping was now my arsenal. Mr. Davenport's file came up first. He had inherited his membership from his father in 1998. The transfer had been processed despite 3 separate violations for what the reports delicately termed inappropriate conduct with female staff. 2 settlements had been paid out quietly. One server had been transferred to our Scottsdale property after Davenport had cornered her in the wine cellar. Julian idolized this man, calling him a titan of industry. I made a few notes regarding Thursday's seating chart, ensuring Davenport would have a perfect, unobstructed view of his protégé's spectacular downfall. Mr. Montgomery's record was even more revealing. His wife, Isabel, the elegant blonde who lunched with my husband every Tuesday, had spent 2 years aggressively campaigning for a family membership. Her file contained 17 letters, each one more desperate than the last, offering increasingly large donations and promising to refer other wealthy applicants. She had finally been granted approval only after her father-in-law, a federal judge, had made a thinly veiled threat to investigate our liquor license. Her desperation, her desperate need for status, would be her undoing on Thursday. Mr. Sinclair had tried to buy his way in with a $50,000 donation before anyone had the chance to explain that the Pinnacle didn't accept bribes, only qualifications. His file included a concise note from Alistair: money but no class, approved only due to father's pharmaceutical holdings, watch for inappropriate behavior. Thursday would be his last dinner at my club. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "You need to see this. Coming to your office now." She arrived 20 minutes later, her face flushed with the thrill of discovery. Without a word, she handed me her phone, already open to Isabel Montgomery's public Instagram account. The evidence was spread out before me like a roadmap of deceit. 12 photographs over the last 6 months, all geotagged at the Pinnacle Club, all of them featuring Julian, despite Isabel's careful attempts to keep him just partially out of the frame. But I recognized my husband's watch, the cuff of his shirt, the distinctive way he held his wine glass with 3 fingers instead of 2. Power lunch with brilliant minds. Read a caption from 3 weeks ago, Julian's sleeve clearly visible at the edge of the picture, discussing futures with someone special. From last month, his reflection caught in the lens of her oversized sunglasses. Some conversations change everything. Posted just yesterday, my anniversary gift to him, his monogrammed cufflinks clearly visible as he reached across the table. Chloe methodically screenshotted each photo while I leaned back in my grandmother's leather chair, a cold, clear understanding finally washing over me. This was never about my appearance. Julian hadn't rejected me because I was simple. He had already selected my replacement, a woman whose husband traveled internationally 3 weeks out of every month, a woman whose thirst for status was as unquenchable as his own. "She's been hunting him," Chloe said quietly, scrolling through the feed. "Look at the progression. The photos get bolder, the captions more intimate. She's marking her territory." "Let her mark all she wants," I replied. "After Thursday, neither of them will be welcome in any establishment I own." Wednesday passed in a flurry of careful preparations. I confirmed the final details with Alistair, arranged for Philippe the photographer to have unrestricted access, and reviewed the presentation Julian had carelessly left on our dining room table. His proposal for the Japanese delegation was good, but it wasn't great. It lacked the crucial data on property holdings and international connections that would be needed to seal the deal, information that I possessed, but that he had never thought to ask me for. Thursday morning dawned gray and humid, the kind of weather that always made Julian irritable about his hair. I woke at my usual time, prepared his breakfast with mechanical precision, and listened to him complain about the humidity's effect on his appearance while he ate the eggs I had made exactly to his liking. He spent 2 hours getting ready for the dinner, trying on 3 different ties before finally settling on the brioni I'd seen him wear to every important meeting for the past year. I sat on our bed, pretending to read a paperback romance novel, the kind with a shirtless man on the cover that Julian found deeply embarrassing, and watched him practice his presentation in the mirror. "The key," he said to his own reflection, "is to make them feel exclusive, like they're being invited to join something truly rarefied." I turned a page with a loud rustle. He glanced at my book with undisguised contempt. "You should really try reading something substantial," he said. "The Wall Street Journal, perhaps, though I suppose it might be a bit difficult for you to follow." "You're probably right," I agreed, turning back to my book about a mousy secretary who inherits a global corporation and systematically destroys everyone who ever dismissed her. Julian had no appreciation for irony. He left at 7:30 after spending 5 minutes adjusting his appearance in the hallway mirror while explaining that these dinners always ran late and I shouldn't wait up for him. The conversation, he explained, would be about international markets and complex financial negotiations, things that would only bore me. He suggested I order some Chinese food from the place down the street and maybe watch one of those reality shows that required no intellectual investment. The door closed behind him without a goodbye kiss, a tradition he had abandoned so long ago that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. 20 minutes later, I stood in our bathroom and began the ritual my grandmother had taught me during those final months when she could barely stand on her own, but still insisted on attending board meetings. This wasn't about beauty. Julian was right. I was plain. This was about presence. This was about transforming myself into someone who commanded attention through sheer power, not through prettiness. The vintage Dior gown slipped on like liquid shadow, its structure transforming my silhouette into something architectural. The Louboutins changed my posture, forcing my spine to straighten and my shoulders to pull back. The diamond earrings caught the light like captured stars, the very same earrings my grandmother had worn to every single meeting where men had tried to buy her out, push her out, or force her out. Chloe arrived to help with my hair, expertly sweeping it up into the same classic chignon my grandmother had worn for 40 years of boardroom battles. She handed me the leather portfolio containing the ownership documents, the tangible proof of the life Julian had never bothered to discover. The car was waiting outside. James was behind the wheel of the Bentley that Julian didn't know existed. When he saw me walking toward the car, his eyes filled with tears. "Miss Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you look just like her." just like she did when she was about to destroy someone. I had James pull the Bentley onto the Pinnacle Club's private drive with the smooth, practiced precision of someone who had performed this maneuver countless times, though never with me as the passenger. Through the tinted windows, I watched the building's grand facade come into view. Limestone and glass rose into the night sky, illuminated from below by subtle gold lighting that made the entire structure seem to glow with an inner fire. This was my building, though I had only ever entered it through the service entrance on the rare occasions I needed to sign documents Alistair couldn't bring to my office. 8:45 exactly, Ms. Vance, James announced, his eyes meeting mine in the rear-view mirror. Shall I pull up to the main entrance? Yes, I said. Let them see the car. The Bentley glided to a silent stop beneath the grand portico, where Thomas, the head valet who had been working these doors for 15 years, stood at attention. The moment he saw the license plate, ES001, my grandmother's personal designation, his entire posture shifted. His usual brisk, efficient movements became slow and almost reverential as he reached for my door handle. "Miss Sterling," he breathed, then quickly caught himself. "Miss Vance, welcome to the Pinnacle." The name correction hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken significance. Every long-term staff member knew the Sterling name. They knew the legends of my grandmother's monthly inspections, her exacting standards, her uncanny ability to remember every employee by name despite running a global empire. They had all been waiting for 3 years, wondering if I would ever publicly claim my inheritance. I stepped out of the Bentley, the sharp click of my heels on the portico's polished marble echoing like a drumbeat. Through the towering glass doors, I could see the lobby staff trying desperately to maintain their professional composure, while simultaneously attempting to get a better look at the woman they had only ever known as a signature on their paychecks and a name on legal documents. Robert, the head concierge who had started his career as a bellhop under my grandmother's direct management, approached with measured steps that couldn't quite conceal his urgency. His usually perfect composure was showing cracks, a slight tremor in his hands, his eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and vindication. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice imbued with 40 years of hospitality experience, "everything has been arranged according to your specifications. The Churchill room is prepared, the staff has been fully briefed, and Mr. Finch is awaiting your arrival in the observatory lounge." "And my husband?" Robert's expression shifted minutely, his professional discretion warring with his personal opinion. "Mr. Croft arrived 30 minutes ago with the partners from his firm. He is currently entertaining the Japanese delegation." The slight pause before the word entertaining told me everything I needed to know. I could already picture Julian holding court, 3 glasses of champagne deep into his performance, playing the role of a master power broker in my establishment, while the real power stood in the lobby wearing 4-inch heels. "Isabel Montgomery?" I asked. Seated at Mr. Croft's immediate right. Her proximity has been noted by several of the other partners' wives. Of course it had. Isabel's desperate social climbing was as subtle as a car alarm, and the wives of the Pinnacle had spent decades perfecting the art of cataloging inappropriate behavior for future use. I walked through the lobby, my heels creating a steady rhythm against the marble that seemed to command every eye in the vast space. The night manager, a woman named Sarah, actually curtsied, a small involuntary dip that she immediately tried to disguise as an attempt to pick something up from her desk. 2 servers carrying trays of champagne stopped dead in their tracks to watch me pass. The entire atmosphere of the building had shifted, as if the very structure recognized that its true owner had finally come home. The observatory lounge occupied a mezzanine level that overlooked the main dining rooms through one-way glass. You could see out, but no one could see in. Alistair Finch was standing near the windows, his silver hair catching the soft light as he observed the scene unfolding in the Churchill room below. The Churchill room was the Pinnacle's crown jewel. It was a circular room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. A baccarat crystal chandelier that cost more than most people's homes, and a massive mahogany table that could seat 20, but tonight held only 12. Julian was seated at what he clearly believed was the head of the table, in a position that would have made my grandmother laugh. Never sit with your back to the entrance, she had always taught me. That's how you miss seeing your enemies arrive. He was gesturing expansively with his champagne flute, his face flushed with alcohol and self-importance. The Japanese executives, Mr. Tanaka, Mr. Sato, and Ms. Kenji, according to my files, maintained expressions of polite interest that didn't quite mask their underlying boredom. They had heard this pitch 100 times before, or at least versions of it, from dozens of American firms trying to break into Asian markets without bothering to understand the culture. Davenport sat to Julian's left, his face already ruddy from wine, occasionally interjecting comments that Julian would then elaborate on as if they were his own brilliant ideas. Montgomery was hunched over his phone, typing with the focused intensity of a man managing a crisis, probably something related to his wife's increasingly obvious infatuation with my husband. And Isabel Montgomery had positioned herself as close to Julian as social decorum would possibly allow. Her chair was angled toward him, her body language screaming availability to anyone with eyes to see. Every few seconds she would touch his arm, his shoulder, the back of his chair, each contact lasting just a beat too long to be considered casual. Her wedding ring, an ostentatious cluster of diamonds her husband had likely bought to compensate for his frequent absences, flashed under the light with every gesture. Sinclair sat at the far end of the table, largely excluded from the main conversation, but laughing too loudly at every joke, desperate to be included in a circle that would never truly accept him. His wife, a nervous, timid woman who looked as though she'd rather be anywhere else on earth, clutched her purse in her lap and said nothing. "Your husband is on his 4th glass of champagne," Alistair observed clinically. "His presentation skills tend to deteriorate rapidly after the 3rd. "Let him drink," I said. Loose tongues reveal true thoughts. Alistair pulled out his iPad, swiping through screens with practiced efficiency. The photographer is positioned in the southeast corner. He has clear angles of the entire table. The staff has been instructed to serve the appetizer course at 9 o'clock, with the main course to follow at 9:45. Your entrance has been scheduled for 9:15, after the appetizers, but before the conversation turns fully to business. He showed me another screen, the membership records for everyone at the table, their violations, their payments, their secrets, all meticulously cataloged in my grandmother's system. "Mr. Sinclair has 2 new violations this month alone," Alistair noted, both involving inappropriate comments to female staff. His membership is already under review. After tonight, it won't matter. Below us, Julian stood, raising his champagne glass for what looked like a toast. Even through the soundproof glass, I could see his mouth forming grand, important words, his free hand gesturing to encompass the room, the moment, his imagined triumph. "He's toasting to the future," Alistair translated, reading his lips with the practiced skill of someone who'd spent decades in the hospitality industry, to partnerships that transcend borders, to a level of success that lesser men can only dream of. Lesser men. The phrase burned in my chest, adding more fuel to the fire that was about to be unleashed. "Ms. Kenji speaks fluent English," Alistair continued, a small smile playing on his lips, though she has been politely pretending otherwise to avoid Julian's clumsy attempts at conversation. "Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato have already decided to pass on the proposal. Their translator informed me they are only remaining out of courtesy." Julian sat down to a round of applause from his colleagues, basking in their approval, while Isabel whispered something in his ear that made him smile, the kind of intimate, knowing smile I hadn't seen directed at me in over 2 years. Alistair closed his iPad and turned to face me. Your grandmother once told me that revenge is a dish best served not cold, but at precisely the right temperature. Too soon, and it lacks impact. Too late, and it loses its meaning. And tonight? Tonight, he said, is perfectly calibrated. At exactly 9:10, Julian stood again, his champagne glass raised for another toast. Through the glass, I watched him perform for his captive audience, completely unaware that his real audience was standing one floor above, watching him the way a hawk watches a field mouse that doesn't yet know it's trapped. Alistair checked his watch. 5 minutes, Miss Vance. I gave a single firm nod, and he turned toward the dining room doors to begin the final act of Julian Croft's public life as he knew it. Alistair moved away from my side with the measured, deliberate steps of someone approaching a lit fuse, knowing the explosion was inevitable, but maintaining perfect professional composure. I watched from my position just outside the dining room doors as he navigated between the tables with practiced grace, approaching Mr. Davenport's chair with the solemn gravity of a court bailiff about to deliver a verdict. The whisper he delivered into Davenport's ear was brief, lasting perhaps 5 seconds, but the man's reaction was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might actually faint. He shot to his feet with such abrupt force that his chair tipped backward, crashing against a mahogany credenza with a sound that made everyone at the table jump. His wine glass, forgotten in his hand, tilted precariously before he slammed it down with trembling fingers. Montgomery, seeing his managing partner's stark reaction, stood up without knowing why, a lifetime of hierarchical conditioning compelling him to mirror his superior's actions. Then Sinclair, desperate to never be the last one to get the memo, scrambled to his feet so quickly that he knocked his knee against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. The other partners followed in a confused wave, each man standing simply because the man next to him was standing, none of them yet understanding what had prompted this sudden, bizarre display of deference. Only Julian remained seated, his face wearing the baffled half-smile of someone who has missed the punchline of an important joke. He looked from Davenport to Montgomery to the standing Japanese executives, his mouth opening to ask what was happening, when Davenport reached down and physically grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet with a surprising strength for a man who spent his days behind a desk. What in the world is going on? Julian's voice carried that sharp, irritated edge he always used when things were not proceeding according to his carefully laid plans. Alistair's voice then filled the Churchill room, carrying the kind of crisp, commanding clarity that comes from decades of commanding attention in spaces built for power. Gentlemen, may I have your attention? Presenting Miss Elara Vance, chairwoman of E. Sterling Enterprises and proprietor of the Pinnacle Club. The silence that followed was so absolute, so profound, that I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. Even the servers, trained to be all but invisible, froze mid-motion. The only sound in the entire room was Isabel Montgomery's sharp intake of breath, a horrified gasp that seemed to go on forever. I pushed open the double doors and entered my domain, each deliberate click of my heels against the Italian marble floor counted down the final seconds of Julian's old life. I did not hurry. This moment, this walk, this revelation had been building for 4 long years, and I was going to savor every single second of it. The vintage Dior gown moved with me like liquid shadow, and the diamonds at my ears caught the light from the massive baccarat chandelier above, scattering tiny, brilliant rainbows across the paneled walls. Julian's face began its transformation in real time, a masterclass in psychological collapse that I observed with the detached fascination of a scientist watching a long-awaited experiment unfold. First came confusion, his eyebrows knitting together as he tried to process why everyone in the room was standing for his simple wife, the one he had instructed to stay in her lane just a few days ago. Then came recognition, his eyes widening as they took in the gown, the shoes, the jewelry, all of it worth more than he had ever claimed we had in our life savings. And finally, the horror. That dawning, crushing, soul-destroying realization as his brain finally connected Alistair's words with the woman who was now walking toward him. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound emerged. He looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping for an element that was no longer available to him. His hand fumbled for his champagne glass, missed, and knocked it over. The golden liquid spread across the pristine white tablecloth like a dark prophecy. Isabel Montgomery's reaction was almost as satisfying. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat in a gesture that would have seemed overly theatrical if it weren't so patently genuine. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a waxy mask against her pale skin. She took a small step backward, then another, instinctively trying to put distance between herself and the catastrophe she had helped to create. Alistair pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the very one Julian had been occupying with such pompous authority just moments before. I sat down with the deliberate grace my grandmother had drilled into me during those long, grueling afternoons in her study, when she'd made me practice sitting and standing in a straight-back chair until my muscles ached. The chair received me like a throne accepting its rightful occupant. Julian remained frozen until Davenport, operating on some primitive understanding of the new hierarchy, physically pushed him toward a side chair, the one usually reserved for junior associates or plus ones who didn't merit a proper placement at the table. My husband, the newly minted senior partner who had spent the entire evening boasting about his influence and connections, sat down heavily in his designated spot on the periphery of power. Davenport's mouth began to move, trying to form words, apologies, explanations, anything to fill the terrible, suffocating silence. Ms. Vance, we had no idea. Julian never mentioned. We would have. I raised my hand, a simple, quiet gesture that stopped him mid-stammer. The sheer power in that moment, the ability to silence a room full of men who considered themselves masters of the universe, was intoxicating. I turned my attention instead to the Japanese executives who were watching the entire drama unfold with barely concealed fascination. Ms. Kenji had dropped her pretense of not speaking English, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato exchanged a quick glance that suggested this was far more entertaining than any business proposal they had come to hear. Mr. Tanaka, Mr. Sato, Ms. Kenji, I said, my voice carrying the calm authority I had kept hidden beneath years of feigned submission. I must apologize for the confusion. Shall we discuss the real business proposition? I believe my husband's presentation, while enthusiastic, lacked certain essential details regarding our property holdings in Osaka, our existing partnership with the Kimura Group in Tokyo, and the development rights we currently hold in Singapore. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine expression of emotion I had seen from him all evening. You have holdings in Osaka? 3 commercial properties in the Ginza district and 2 in Shinjuku, all acquired through Sterling Enterprises over the past 18 months. I pulled out my phone, swiping to the property portfolio I had long since memorized. Our current occupancy rate is 97%, with extensive waiting lists for all premium spaces. Julian made a sound, not quite a word, more like the sound of air escaping from a punctured tire. I continued without acknowledging him. Alistair appeared at my shoulder with the iPad, the membership database already open. I took it with a nod of thanks, making a show of scrolling through the names while the entire table watched in silent, mounting horror. Let's see, I said, my tone as conversational as if I were reviewing a grocery list rather than determining their social fates. Davenport, current standing. 3 violations for inappropriate conduct with staff. Approved for continued membership despite these infractions. Interesting. Davenport's ruddy face turned a shade of deep purple. Those were misunderstandings. I'm sure they were, I murmured, continuing to scroll. Montgomery, membership approved after a 2-year waiting period. Your wife Isabel was quite persistent. 17 letters, if I recall correctly. Such admirable determination. Isabel made a small, whimpering sound, shrinking down in her chair as if she could will herself to disappear through the floor. Sinclair, I continued, attempted to donate $50,000 to expedite his membership application. When informed that we do not accept bribes, your father-in-law threatened to have our licenses reviewed, a creative approach to networking. Sinclair's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual nervous laughter completely absent. I set down the iPad and looked directly at Julian for the very first time since entering the room. His face had gone a pale, ashen gray, the kind of color that suggested either an imminent cardiac event or a complete and total psychological collapse. Julian Croft, I said, letting his name hang in the air like an accusation. Current membership status under review. Under review? His voice cracked on the words. Alistair stepped forward slightly. We have certain standards at the Pinnacle, Mr. Croft. Members who embarrass their spouses, who describe them as too simple for polite company, who suggest they should stay in their lane. Well, such behavior indicates a character deficit that is simply incompatible with our core values. Julian's chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard as he shot to his feet. His face was flushed with a volatile combination of alcohol and raw desperation, his hands gripping the edge of the table, so hard his knuckles had turned white. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the forced, brittle authority of a man trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond him. Ilara, we need to discuss this privately. Now. I continued scrolling through the membership database on the iPad, not even bothering to look up at him. The dismissal was deliberate, calculated to demonstrate the monumental shift in power to everyone watching. You wanted me to stay in my lane, darling, I said, my voice carrying the same casual cruelty he had used when he delivered those words to me. This is my lane. It just so happens to include every building you've spent the last 3 years desperately trying to impress people in. Julian turned to Davenport, then to Montgomery, his hands gesturing frantically as he tried to salvage something, anything, from the smoldering wreckage of his career. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I had no idea Ilara had any connection to the Pinnacle. She never mentioned, "So you're incompetent?" Davenport's voice cut through Julian's stammering like a knife. You lived with the owner of the most exclusive club in the city for 4 years, and you never knew. Julian's face reddened even further. She deceived me. She lied about who she was. Or, I said, finally looking up from the iPad, my gaze cold and steady, you never asked. You assumed I was exactly what you wanted me to be, someone inferior who made you feel superior. Someone too simple for your sophisticated world. Isabel Montgomery chose that precise moment to attempt her escape. She rose from her chair with practiced grace, pressing a hand to her forehead in a gesture of distress that might have been convincing if her eyes weren't darting toward the exit like a trapped animal. I'm feeling quite faint, she announced to no one in particular. The heat, perhaps. I should... Isabel, I called out, my voice as sweet as honey laced with arsenic. Leaving so soon? But you haven't told everyone about your regular Tuesday lunches with my husband. She froze mid-step, her designer heel hovering inches above the floor. Those Instagram posts were so enlightening. Power lunch with brilliant minds, discussing futures with someone special. Some conversations change everything, all geotagged at the Pinnacle, all during Julian's supposed client emergencies. I pulled out my phone, the screenshots Chloe had taken already loaded and ready. 12 photos over 6 months. Your husband, David, is still in Tokyo, isn't he? He returns tomorrow, I believe. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear all about these business discussions. The sound Isabel made wasn't a word. It was more like the sound of air being squeezed from a balloon. Her husband, sitting 3 seats away, had gone completely rigid, his face cycling through confusion, dawning recognition, and pure, unadulterated rage in the span of a few seconds. Montgomery's eyes moved between his wife and Julian with the horrified comprehension of a man who had been too focused on his phone to notice his marriage dissolving right in front of him. "Isabel." Montgomery's voice was dangerously quiet. "Tuesday lunches? It's not... We were just discussing... Julian was helping me with..." Her explanations tangled and died in her throat as she realized there was no innocent explanation for 12 documented private meetings her husband knew nothing about. Mr. Tanaka, who had been watching this drama unfold with the detached interest of someone enjoying a particularly good play, cleared his throat delicately. He turned to face me directly, offering a slight, respectful bow of acknowledgement. "Miss Vance," he said in perfect, unaccented English, abandoning any further pretense of needing a translator. "Your property holdings in Osaka. They interest us far more than your husband's vague proposals. Perhaps we could discuss an exclusive use agreement for the Pinnacle for our American operations." I replied in fluent Japanese, watching Julian's jaw drop. "Of course, my company is already deeply involved in the Japanese market." Mr. Sato and Ms. Kenji exchanged impressed glances. Ms. Kenji immediately pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up what looked like financial projections. "You speak Japanese?" Julian said, the words coming out strangled and weak. 3 years of private lessons while you thought I was at the community college," I replied, switching back to English for his benefit. "Tuesday and Thursday mornings. You never asked what classes I was taking." I turned my full attention to the Japanese executives, conducting the rest of the negotiation in their native language, while Julian sat in stunned, humiliated silence, completely unable to follow the conversation that was deciding his professional fate. Within 5 minutes, we had outlined the framework for a $40 million exclusive partnership that would give their company permanent office space at the Pinnacle and first right of refusal on 3 of my commercial properties in Tokyo. Davenport tried to interject something about the existing proposal from Croft, Davenport County, but Mr. Tanaka dismissed him with a polite but firm wave of his hand. "We prefer to work with partners who value transparency," Mr. Tanaka said, looking pointedly at Julian, "and who understand that respect in personal relationships is a direct reflection of professional capabilities." The deal that Julian had spent 6 months pursuing, the very deal that would have secured his promotion to managing partner, evaporated in less time than it took to serve dessert. I stood smoothing my dress with deliberate calm and looked down at my husband one last time. "Alistair," I said, and the general manager stepped forward immediately. "Please process Mr. Croft's membership termination this evening, effective immediately." "No!" Julian's protest came out as a desperate shout. "You can't do this. I pay $40,000 a year for that membership." "Paid," I corrected him. "Past tense. Your final statement will be prorated through today." "This is vindictive. This is business," I interrupted. "The same kind of business you've been conducting while telling me I was too simple to understand it." Alistair pulled out his phone, typing quickly. "Security will meet you at the locker room if you have any personal items to collect, Mr. Croft. Your access has been revoked as of..." He checked his screen. 9:47 p.m. The partners who had spent the evening celebrating Julian's success were now physically backing away from him, their bodies angling toward the door as if his failure might be contagious. Davenport had taken 3 large steps backward. Montgomery was still staring at his wife with undisguised fury. Sinclair had somehow managed to edge himself almost entirely out of the room. Filippi, the photographer who had been documenting Pinnacle events for a decade, moved through the chaos with practiced invisibility, his camera capturing every devastating moment. Julian's look of utter devastation as he realized his world had collapsed Davenport's desperate attempt to distance himself from his disgraced protégé, Isabel's quiet tears as her husband gathered his coat and left without a single word, the Japanese executives shaking my hand with genuine respect. And through it all, I stood at the head of the table, wearing my grandmother's diamonds, no longer simple, no longer hidden, no longer willing to stay in any lane but my own. "Gentlemen," I said to the room at large, though most of them were already fleeing, "I believe this dinner has concluded." The Churchill room emptied out within minutes, the executives fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, leaving behind half-eaten meals and their abandoned dignity. I remained at the head of the table, watching the exodus with the detached calm of someone who had already won the war. Alistair stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back, a silent witness to the aftermath of what would undoubtedly become a Pinnacle Club legend. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Howard Nathanson, the attorney my grandmother had entrusted with her entire empire, and watched Julian sign the divorce papers with a hand that trembled slightly. He looked smaller somehow, sitting across the polished mahogany desk from me in a suit that now hung loosely on his frame. His face had the hollow, haunted look of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away. The prenuptial agreement he had so proudly insisted upon before our wedding lay on the desk between us, the very document he had presented with such condescending pride, explaining how it would protect his future earnings from a spouse who might try to take advantage. He had never once thought to ask if I had any assets of my own to protect. The irony was not lost on either of us as he signed away any and all claim to my $95 million inheritance. "The apartment contents are specified here," Howard said, sliding another page forward. "Mr. Croft retains his clothing, personal electronics, and the furniture he brought into the marriage." Julian's jaw tightened at the word "retains," as if allowing him to keep his own belongings was some great concession on my part. He signed the page without reading it, long past the point of fighting for anything. "I have an offer," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the wall behind me. "A small firm in Boston. They don't care about what happened." "Good," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want him utterly destroyed, just removed from my life and properly humbled. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Did you ever love me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I loved who I thought you were," I replied honestly, "and you loved who you thought I should be. Neither of us ever loved who we actually were." He left without another word. The last time I saw Julian Croft, he was loading cardboard boxes into a U-Haul truck while our neighbors pretended not to watch, the story of his public humiliation having already spread like wildfire through every social circle that mattered. Mrs. Patterson from 4B actually brought out a pitcher of lemonade for the other residents who had gathered to witness his departure, turning his moving day into an impromptu block party. That afternoon, Chloe insisted on taking me to lunch at the Pinnacle to celebrate. Walking through those front doors as myself, not pretending to be anything other than the owner, felt like taking a deep, clean breath for the first time in years. The staff didn't quite know how to react. Some bowed their heads, others applauded softly. Thomas, the valet, actually had to wipe tears from his eyes when he saw me. We sat in the main dining room, not the Churchill room with its recent heavy memories, and Alistair personally selected a bottle of champagne from the cellar. "Dom Perignon, 1996, he announced with a touch of ceremony, presenting it like a holy sacrament. "That's a $3,000 bottle," I protested. "It was your grandmother's favorite," he replied. "She could never afford it during her years as a secretary, but she bought a case the day she closed the deal on the Pinnacle. She said that someday her granddaughter would drink it in celebration." Chloe raised her glass once Alistair had poured, her eyes bright with unshed tears of her own. "I have a confession to make," she said. "I've known about your inheritance all along." The champagne glass paused halfway to my lips. "What?" Grandma Evelyn told me back in the hospital during those last weeks. It was when you were at work, and I would just sit with her during the day. She made me promise to watch over you, but to never tell you about the money. Alara needs to learn this lesson on her own, she said. Being underestimated is only a weapon if you learn how to wield it yourself. I thought about all those moments when Chloe had bitten her tongue, watching Julian belittle and dismiss me, all while knowing I could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. That must have been torture for you. The hardest thing I've ever had to do, she admitted. But she was right. You had to discover your own power in your own time. We toasted to my grandmother's memory with the champagne she had dreamed of drinking back when men called her sweetheart and asked her to fetch them coffee while they stole her ideas. In the months that followed, I reshaped my life entirely on my own terms. I kept our small apartment but bought the entire building, not for profit but for a purpose. The Evelyn Sterling Foundation's first major project was to convert it into affordable, secure housing for women leaving bad marriages, women who needed what I'd had, a safe place and time to rediscover their own worth. I still shopped at Target when the mood struck and clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, because my grandmother had taught me that wealth without wisdom only breeds a different kind of poverty. The habits of frugality she had instilled in me weren't about need anymore. They were about remembering where power truly comes from. Not from money, but from understanding value. When I walked into the Pinnacle now, everyone stood. Not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine respect. I had earned my place through revelation, not just inheritance. At business forums where I now spoke about property development and women's economic empowerment, young women would take copious notes while their male bosses tried to pretend they hadn't dismissed me as Julian's simple wife at dozens of charity events. Davenport approached me at one such forum, his face carrying the permanent flush of embarrassment it had worn since that night in the Churchill room. "Ms. Vance, I just want to apologize again for—" "Stop," I said. "You've apologized 17 times by my count. Either mean it and change your behavior, or stop saying it." He nodded meekly and scurried away. But I noticed later that he had promoted 2 female associates to partner that very week. Isabel Montgomery vanished from the social scene entirely after her husband filed for a very public divorce. The last anyone heard, she was working in a boutique in Connecticut, selling handbags to women who had no idea about her history. Her replacement on various charity committees took careful notes whenever I spoke, having learned the immense value of paying attention to quiet women. On the first anniversary of my revelation at the Pinnacle, I finally opened the sealed envelope my grandmother's lawyer had given me, with strict instructions to wait until I truly understood. The paper inside was thin, her handwriting shaky, but determined. "My dearest Alara," it began, "being plain is not about faces or fashion. It's about letting others reveal their own foolishness while you build your empire in silence. They never see us coming because they never truly see us at all. Men like your Julian, and yes, I knew exactly what he was, the moment you introduced him to me. They mistake visibility for value. Use their blindness. Build your power. Then stand in your truth and watch them kneel." At the bottom, in writing so shaky I could barely read it, was a postscript. "P.S. that Julian is an ass. Destroy him beautifully." I had the letter professionally framed and hung it above my desk in the E. Sterling Enterprises office, where every visiting executive could read it. More than one has stood before it, the color draining from their face as they wondered who, in their own life, they might have so foolishly underestimated. The frame shop owner, a woman in her 60s named Dorothy, had read it while she was mounting it and said quietly, "Your grandmother sounds like someone who understood the long game." "She understood that being underestimated was just another form of armor," I replied. Dorothy smiled. "The best kind. The one they never see until it's far too late." Now, a year later, I stand in that same office, looking out at the city my grandmother conquered in silence and that I now rule openly. Being plain was never about beauty. It was about being invisible enough to see everything while revealing nothing until the perfect moment. Julian had been right about one thing. I was too simple for his world, but his world was small and fragile, built on appearances and the approval of others. My world, my grandmother's world, was built on patience, power, and the perfect, breathtaking moment of revelation, proving that the plainest faces often hide the sharpest minds. This story of calculated revenge left you absolutely speechless. Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Alara walked into the Churchill room and everyone stood for the plain wife Julian had dismissed. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.